I wish I could just rip down my whole website and put up a page that said, if you want our help, find us. Marketing gets busier and busier and busier and busier. And part of me thinks there's got to be a better way. If I just focus on the work and quit marketing at all. I love the romantic idea that the business can survive and even thrive.
Hello and welcome, Blair Enns. How are you?
I'm very good, Anneli Hansen. Thank you. How are you?
I'm great. I really look forward to having this chat with you and to kind of pick your brain a little bit about how to become Blair Enns. No, just kidding. But how to...
I'll ask my mother.
That could be really difficult. But how to become a thought leader like yourself. So that's what I want to know more about. So are you ready to kind of just dive in?
Yes.
You look scared.
I'm not sure how to do this, but I'm sure I can answer your questions. And maybe by the end of this interview, I will know how this happened, whatever this is.
Okay. First of all, you are one of the people that I really look up to when it comes to articulating your thinking. Every time I think about thought leadership, I think about, how can Blair be so good at articulating his thinking? And I want to know how you do it. So first of all, how do you organize your thoughts?
Oh, I'm pretty sure I do not organize my thoughts. Wow, I feel like I'm failing some sort of remedial course on thought leadership. But how do I organize my thoughts? So I'm a writer. I think through my fingers. I mean, I understand some people can generate ideas without having to go through their hands and into the keyboard.
Mm.
I don't know how that happens because it has to happen for me. And every once in a while, I'll put something out there on social media or have kind of public conversations with other people about it. A small part of me is open to the idea that you can actually come up with meaningful new thinking without writing about it. But I can't. So how do I organize my ideas? I have to write. I just start writing.
Okay. So does it start with you coming up with an idea, or does it start with you seeing a problem or someone ask you a question, for example?
It starts with you already writing on a problem. I think I hadn't thought deeply about this before, but I think momentum on this subject is really important, especially if you're like me, like neurologically, and you feel like you have to write to think. You don't know what you think until you write about it. Then once you're writing on something, there are all these tangents, all these other doors open that you could go down, and you think, oh, there's a good idea. I should come back to that. I should come back to that. And if you don't make note of those kind of places on the trail that you would like to come back to and explore, you will forget they're there. So momentum is one of the most important lessons, I think. And momentum is, as you are exploring a new idea, you will almost certainly come up with these tangents and different places that you could go. And you need to mark those places so that you remember to go back to them. And if you do not stop and make a note somewhere, they will be gone forever. Well, I don't know about forever, but possibly forever.
This is really interesting because I'm a verbal processor. So I have to talk to think. But I also realized when you said this to Mark is when you talk now and you say things, I need to take small notes, and then I make a little bit a star with something that I think is important, because then I can say let me circle back to this thing. And so I think that's kind of a little bit what you mean, because if I don't do that, it's impossible for me to remember. Then it's gone. I'm like, this was interesting, but then it's gone. So I kind of have to go, how do you do it when you write? Really step by step, how do you do it?
So I write a blog post every 2 weeks. That blog post gets turned into a podcast episode, or there's a 50% chance that it will get turned into a podcast episode with on my Two Bobs podcast. And as I'm writing, I start posts in Evernote, and then at some point when they're almost done, I move them to Google Docs, but I start them in Evernote. And as I'm writing in Evernote, I get an idea. I open a new note. I tag it post. I come up with like a one line to describe the idea. Then I go back to what I was doing.
Oh, good idea. I like that. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that's actually a really good way of doing it. I use my notes in my phone, kind of similar, but I think it's a different thing of actually writing that being with your, it's not the same thing writing on a phone.
No, I don't see that as writing.
Oh.
Well, that's not true. I have actually had moments of inspiration and written lengthy things on my phone. It's just not nearly as comfortable, obviously, as using a keyboard.
Okay, so for me, who's a verbal processor, it's really difficult because no one wants to listen for hours, obviously. And I get tired of myself. So do you know any other verbal processors who maybe turned into more of a writer?
I think it's very difficult to generate what you might call original ideas without writing. You can process to understand. You can talk through something to understand. As like in this conversation, we're talking about things that I haven't thought really too deeply about. So I'm processing as I speak. But if I want to get a cogent argument, if I want to build a model for how to do any of this, I will have to write it. And I can think about it, I can talk about it all I want. And it is not until I'm writing and rewriting and editing and reorganizing that I will actually come up with something that is meaningful. I might have the gist of the idea, but not fully articulated.
Mm.
So I think you can be a verbal processor and still kind of harness the power of writing to get to the next level of your thinking. But I might be wrong.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure it out. I'm also thinking, I remember the last time I talked to you, you said, I love to go to big cities, but I don't want to stay there too many days because I lose my own thought, like my own way of thinking, and I don't want to get too influenced by people. Is this somehow connected, and also where you choose to live and the way you process your thoughts? Are you in a really good place where you live to be Blair Enns, the thought leader and, author?
I'm convinced of it. I'm convinced I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't live where I live. And I couldn't think the thoughts that I think if I didn't live where I live. And I might be wrong, but I'm just convinced of it.
Mm.
You need distance. So you need to sample. You need to be a learner. So you need to be tapped into different sources. And, I find it interesting how different people, and even individuals, including myself, have these kind of varied ways of taking information in. Usually, I'm reading multiple books at one time,
Mm.
and I get a lot of my information through books. I don't read many blog posts. I don't watch too many educational videos on YouTube. It's more for if I need to learn how to fix a dishwasher or something, or some other things. But I listen to a ton of podcasts and I read a lot of books normally. And then there are times, like in the last couple of years, where I haven't read many books at all. I don't understand why. But I know I go in sprints. So I forget what your question was, but there's this. Oh, back to where I live. Like you have to intake information, and so you have to. Maybe you don't have to understand. It's probably healthy to understand where you get that information. I'm always worried about taking in too much information. So living in a remote mountain village in the middle of British Columbia is really helpful. I haven't watched, since television moved online and became streaming. Obviously, I have a bunch of streaming subscriptions, but I went without television for over 20 years.
Wow.
I started cutting off sources of information and stimulus. because I needed more time to think. So I've always been very careful about the information that comes in. I don't absorb a lot of information from other people in the space that I serve. Like even David Baker, I do a podcast with, he writes every week. I might read 1 in 6 or 8 of his posts.
Wow.
Unless it's one that he sent to me because we're going to do a podcast episode on it. And it's just, that's just an example. I sample information of what other people kind of in my space are doing. I've written a book on selling. I like to say, I own all the books on selling. Not all of them, but I own lots of them, a few dozen. I've never read any of them from cover to cover.
Wow.
I'll flip through them to glean some ideas, but I do not want to deeply absorb somebody else's content because I don't want it. All of our content, all of our thought leadership it's obviously informed by others and multiple sources, but you have to be careful about the input because the input affects the output.
So true. And I mean, I'm curious about one thing. When you say this, I can't help reflecting on does it take a good confidence to do it the way you do? Because to not be so influenced by others, you also need to trust yourself. Have you thought about that?
No, but it makes sense. It's logical. I don't know if it takes good confidence because I haven't had, I kind of won the lottery on that front. My parents always said all these, in hindsight now, ridiculous things to me about all the potential I had and how great I was. And they still do to this day. They're 85. So
Wow.
they've been really good for my confidence. And then I have this chemical advantage of naturally high testosterone. That's why, a scientist friend of mine jokes that, these underachieving males will get up in the morning, unfit, underachieving, et cetera, look in the mirror and see themselves as the master of the universe because they have this chemical, you could call it an advantage or disadvantage, called testosterone. And I think mine is probably genetically naturally high. So I don't know I've had moments of not being confident, but I'm a generally confident person, probably to a fault at times. So I don't know. I'm sure that helps. Yeah, it has to help because I think back, I'll look back at stuff I've written even just a few years ago, and I'll think, that was garbage.
Mm.
But at the time, I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't that the best thing to feel that? Because then you grow.
Yeah, I guess so. But I do see the lack of confidence holding people back on this front. That's for sure. So you do just, like Seth Godin says, you've got to ship. You've just got to publish. You've just got to get stuff out there. I think the best book on this topic is Stephen Pressfield's genius book, The War of Art.
Okay.
And it's one of the few books where I've bought multiple copies, probably 40 copies now, and just give away to people. I just gave away a copy to a friend a couple of weeks ago. We're still talking about it. And it's just this idea of, well, there are a lot of ideas in it, but the key idea is resistance. So let me just give you the high level of the book. The first section of the book is called What I Do. And it's about a page and a half. And it describes his morning routine. He gets up in the morning and he's clearly almost OCD about his writing routine. He gets up, he does all of these things. He goes into his room, he puts on his lucky sweatshirt. He says this little invocation. He's got this thing that's pointed at him. He's got all of his lucky charms and he starts writing until he's done. So he describes it, and it's just a beautiful scene that he describes as somebody who's a slight lunatic over the ritual of writing. And then the second section that follows it immediately is less than half a page, and it's called What I Know. And this is the mic drop moment. He says, what real writers know that wannabe writers don't is that it's not the writing that's hard. It's sitting down to write. Mm. And then he says, what keeps us from sitting down to write is resistance. And then he describes, so he takes this resistance to writing, he externalizes it as kind of this enemy. And then for the next third of the book, he talks about how resistance shows up in these different forms, these different types of distractions, and how you are in this constant battle against resistance. And that's why the title is called The War of Art, because you are at war against resistance. So that's in a nutshell. You want to be a thought leadership?
Yeah.
That's it. It's not the writing. You have to write. It's not the writing that's hard. It's a sitting down to write. So conquer sitting down to write. And that's most of the battle.
Would you say it's mostly a battle then to discipline or your lack of confidence or imposter?
Discipline. Like, it's amazing what happens to your confidence when you just start doing something over and over again. You practice something, you get good at it. If lack of confidence is keeping you from starting, that's something else. That's lack of discipline. Like, you just have to barge through that confidence. I think if you can't barge through that confidence of starting, then you're not going to get anywhere on anything.
Yeah. So it's very similar to authors and a lot of designers, because I think I talk to a lot of people when it come to creative solutions too. Like, a lot of people just think, especially younger people, like, oh, you just take a walk or you just wait for the inspiration. But it's like, no, you just have to actually go to your desk, sit down, do the hard work. So it sounds a little bit similar.
There's a famous writer, not so famous that I remember who said it, but the line is pretty famous. Somebody said, so is your success, is it due to basically inspiration or perspiration? Like, what is it? Is it inspiration or it's hard work? And his answer is, well, it's inspiration. But luckily for me, I find that inspiration shows up every morning at 9 a.m. Basically, back to Stephen Pressfield, sits down, and at a certain time, he is writing regardless. I mean, books have been written on this. There are lots of quotes on it. And you just can't get away from discipline. Jerry Seinfeld is a great example. He talks about it in numerous places, including his book. Like, he says the key to his success is that he did not take meetings. He just wrote. He just writes every day. You have to write every day. And he's got this device where this idea of don't break the chain. He says you get an actual physical calendar. You write a joke or jokes for that day, and you don't keep track of how long, or you have a very small minimum length of time, because the most important thing is that you start. It's not how long you go or even how good it is. And then you X off that day on the calendar, and then you do it again. You X the next day. After 3 days, you've got a chain. And then he says, now your motivation is don't break the chain. Don't break the chain. And you keep those X's going every day. So there's the discipline part of it. But if we go back to the input part of it, you want to come up with something that's new, you want new ideas, and not just repackaging other people's ideas or recycling other people's ideas. But you won't get your ideas without ingesting other people's ideas. But it's like the ingredients going into the cake that you're baking. You have to be really careful about that. So if you're on an all sugar diet, if you're just dumping sugar into that thing, to correct the metaphor, it's just going to be a big blob of sugar. You want spices. You want this complexity of flavor. That means you have to ingest information from different sources. And I would suggest that probably the most important part of that is making sure that you're ingesting information that's way outside of your domain, the domain on which you want to be an expert. You have to read or watch videos or listen to obscure things that have nothing to do with what you do. One of the mistakes that I see, and maybe it's not a mistake, maybe this only works for me, but if you're just too laser focused on inputting information about the area where you want to be an expert, I mean, in some domains, it's important that you understand kind of the canon, all the work that's gone before you. When I wrote a book on pricing, quite unlike when I wrote a book on selling, when I wrote a book on pricing, I read everything I could read on the subject because there's a kind of a body of knowledge that on that topic that I felt like I needed to know the body of knowledge. I needed to understand it all. And then, so in that book, I am very clearly, I think you can read that book and see the influences of all kinds of other authors. And I do my best to cite and to attribute. And it's probably not good enough, but it's clearly me standing on the shoulders of numerous people. Mm-hmm. The book on selling, the Win Without Pitching Manifesto, I just fundamentally believe we all know what bad selling looks like because we've been on the buying side of it. So you don't have to read a single book on selling to generate an idea of what good selling looks like. So I avoided ingesting information on the topic of selling. In fact, I don't like reading about selling. I don't like how it's done generally. I don't like the guidance, most of the guidance that's out there on it. And I certainly didn't want to be influenced by anybody else's work. So depending on what the output is, you're either avoiding or limiting input on a topic, or you're absorbing all you can.
Okay, I think this is so interesting because a reflection on that is, okay, so I don't have an academic education, but I do have higher education, but not from a university. But I always had a little bit of imposter syndrome of that I didn't go to the university. But it's interesting what you said about how I reflect about topics. I know from having a lot of experience working, building brands, that I definitely have enough input to start writing about a lot of things. And I do all the time. It's just a very big, scary topic in a way, because there's so many people writing about it, so much to take in, so much academic, things that I can read. If I compare that to selling, for example, which I actually don't teach, but I also have a lot of experience in, I have a totally different approach to that, like you said, because for me, I could easily write a book about selling, just reflecting on the relationship between dogs and humans and horses and humans, because the energy we have in animal relationships, it's everything about the push and pull kind of psychology in selling. It's so easy to see and to compare for me how logic it is, how we relate to each other and how we relate to humans. And I would write a book about that without even reading any book about sales. I think it could be a success. There's so many people out there who knows dogs and relationship to dogs. You know what I mean?
Okay, let's pull on that thread, because the other thing that we haven't talked about yet is you need a point of view, which often is a model of some kind. And you have a model. You've just expressed one. It's this idea that, and I'm not going to do it justice, that you're using the human-animal relationship as a model for human-human relationship in sales to understand the more emotional aspect of it. This isn't, so I know a guy, quite a successful solo consultant, who's also a rancher. And he brings the idea of working with animals into his work of working with CEOs of oil companies and heads of state.
Oh.
And then you think of Temple Grandin's work. I don't know if you're familiar with her. Similar idea. She understands people because she understands animals.
So I need to find my own point of view. First of all, maybe need to read what they have.
Just because there are a couple of other people have something similar doesn't mean it's not. It's definitely not a crowded space. There are lots you can do with that. So now you have a point of view or a model. So what's a model? It's not just a point of view. It's a way of organizing information. It's a way of looking at the world. And my next book opens with a quote, because it's a book about my model for selling. And it opens with a quote from a statistician an author named George Box. And it's a great line. He says, "All models are wrong, but some are useful." And so when you have a model, and you're learning from a model and you're teaching a model, what I found is you have to be prepared for the people who say, well, that's not right. Like our model is the 4 conversations. We view the sale as a series of 4 linear and discrete conversations. And the last thing you want is somebody arguing about the model. So I just open with saying all models are wrong. Some are useful. So the power of the model is not its veracity. It's not whether it's right or not. The power of the model is it useful or not? So is it useful to think of the sales relationship like a relationship between a person and a dog?
Even
Well,
facilitation.
it's useful to you.
Yeah.
And if it's useful to you,
Yeah.
it will be useful to others too. So I think you're onto something. And so we've talked about discipline. We've talked about the being careful, curating your inputs.
Yeah.
And then the output, you need a model. You don't need it, but I think, the success of my thought leadership, choosing my words careful here, usually comes down to a point of view, a model of some kind or a point of view. I am constantly looking for models, and just a metaphor. Oh, this is like that. Selling is selling. So a big one that we used that was taught to me many years ago by a woman named Pauline O'Malley. She handed me a book on change management and said, buying is changing, therefore selling is change management. Mm-hmm. And that's a brilliant insight. And it was given to her by a friend of hers who handed her the same book. Now, it's not a great book, but the idea that buying is changing and selling is change management, you could write a book on that. I fond of saying selling is leading. You can read any good book on leadership and you can substitute out the word leading and in place put in selling, and that will become a good book on selling. And there are other metaphors. Other people say, oh, selling's like dating.
Yeah.
And I say, to me, it's more like parenting. Like somebody has to be the adult. Mm-hmm. So these are all valid models. They're all wrong, but people might find them useful. So that's if you really want to break through in your thinking, you develop a model.
Okay, so the model is not like the process of steps by step, right? It's kind of a way of thinking. So now when you have that, this is like that kind of thing. How do you test your point of view? Like when you write this down, what is the next step?
Well, you write about it. You spend a lot of time thinking about it. You think in public via writing about it. I don't know any other way other than to write about it. I bring a lot of different models into my work, and we use a bunch of them. And I think if you look at the kind of the body of work at Win Without Pitching, I could probably name at least a dozen models that influence the work. And then we have our what you might call foundational model. It's the 4 conversations, and I'm fond of saying it's the lens that we look through. It's the frame off of which we hang everything that we teach. Everything that we teach I can fit into that 4 conversations model. I spent years before arriving at the 4 conversations messing with other models. And I found as I went to different places, aspects of the sale, I would think, oh, this doesn't fit in the model. And the model, so I kept making the model bigger and bigger. It started to look, you want to visualize it, so you want to be able to draw it out. It started, a team member called it the muskrat because it started to just look funny. At some point, we just killed it. It was just a model should simplify complexity. And this was complexifying something that was already somewhat complex.
How do you know if it's not simple enough?
So you try it on. So in my case, we can view the sale as a series of 4 linear discrete conversations. I know it's wrong. It's not always 4 conversations, and they're not always linear and discrete, but it's helpful. So it's at any point in the sale, you simply stop and ask yourself, wait a minute, what conversation is this? Number 1, what's my objective in this conversation? Number 2, and what framework do I use to navigate to a conversation's objective? Number 3. And then there's some more stuff in there I'm not going to talk about here, but that's it in a nutshell. So now you have this model that organizes the entire arc of the sale. and you're writing about it and you're thinking about it, and then something happens in the sale, or you make an observation, in my case, and I go, well, does that fit the model? Where does that go in the model? And so you keep having these thoughts, and as long as you can keep finding a place for this in the model, then the model is still valid.
So your 4 conversations, just so we kind of, I just kind of don't want to leave people hanging there. Is there a secret, the 4 ones, if you just short describe them?
It's not a secret. I write about it in my next book, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like the last one's the closing conversation. So that's fairly typical in sales. So it's like, there's nothing genius about the names of the conversations. One of them, you might furrow your brow. The other 3, you would go, oh yeah, I know what those are. And then there are objectives, and then there are principles that you embody as you use the framework to navigate to a conversation's objective. So I can explain it like this. You can understand it. It's all pretty simple. But then as you get into it, you realize, oh, there's complexity here. But on the surface, you look at it and go, I get it. Makes sense. It's a way of organizing things. Like you simply, okay, I'm having a sales conversation. Wait a minute. What conversation is this? Oh, this is a qualifying conversation. What am I supposed to be doing? I'm vetting the lead to see if there's a fit here. How do I do that? I use my qualifying conversation framework. Okay, here are the questions I asked. So that's how you kind of organize the sale. Somebody who passed away recently, I met him 20 years ago, and he said to me early in my Win Without Pitching career, he said, I hear you're a genius at business development. You know what to say after hello. And I thought it was such a funny line. You know what to say after hello. And in some ways, this idea of the 4 conversations is the answer to the question, what do you say after hello?
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. I actually spent 4 hours with my sister yesterday, who's a teacher. I think we actually created a really good start, a beginning of a model. But after a while, I was like, these 5 things here, is it too simple? And she's like, no, it's not, because it's just
more
describing.
Likely that you will make it too complex.
Yeah, because she said that when you go a little bit deeper, then it's getting a little bit more juicy, when we explain things. But on the surface, it looks very this is very logical.
Yeah.
I think we're onto something, actually, because looking really from my intuition, my intuitive side, combining cognitive thinking with how to really use my intuitive side when it comes to facilitation, because it's something around you can't just be in your head. You also need to feel, and it's really difficult to do models and to teach feelings and connections. So that's where I'm trying to do something.
I don't know. Obviously, I haven't thought deeply about that before, but I don't know that at a gut level, I don't know that that's true. That doesn't feel right to me. I think there's all kinds of room for emotions.
I think it really is, but it's not so easy to explain it and how they're connected to each other, and definitely not how to teach it. I think it's more rational and logical to teach cognitive thinking. It's not so easy to teach and explain intuition and how to read energy and people.
Yeah, you're right. But there's this move away in all of these domains. There's this move away from rationality. So you think of the whole field of behavioral economics is the economists, they kind of get mocked a little bit for this idea of this straw man argument of homo economicus, which is this fake, it's the person who is entirely rational. Every decision is entirely rational. They weigh every variable and come up with exactly the right decision. And then the social scientists come along, like Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky and Dan Ariely and all these others. And they say, yeah, these machines that you think, these computers that you think people are, they're wet and messy and irrational. and so they brought the emotions and the biases, the mental biases, and all of these things to economics. And you start to see that in every field. Like Chris Voss, whose book on negotiating, it's got to be the best book on negotiating, best-selling book on negotiating ever written. To me, that book, what he did is he took a behavioralist approach to negotiating. Because if you read the books on negotiating, I've read a bunch of them. Many of them are written by professors. Most of them seem really academic, and it's all about these quite rigid models, tested. You do this, and it's really sometimes just overwhelmingly complex. And what Chris Voss did, and he didn't pioneer this move in negotiating, but he's the one who popularized it through his book. Is like, no, these humans aren't rational at all. And it's, his domain of like negotiating with like kidnappers.
Mm-hmm.
Logic doesn't play a big role. That is almost entirely emotional. So there's another model there. The person that can bring the emotional point of view to what is previously an fairly academic topic has a breakthrough opportunity.
That sounds good for me.
Mm-hmm.
Blair, I need to do a sidetrack into my other notes here, because you said something that opened up a note I had from our last conversation. Okay. You said, I love making decisions based on emotions. I'm a deeply romantic person. Okay, so now when you open that kind of, emotional side, I want to hear more about that. Like, Blair Enns loves making decisions out of emotions. Can you tell me more about that? And what kind of decisions?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I trust my gut on a lot of things, and I don't know if I can pick an example. Probably that's not too personal. It doesn't always lead you to the right decision. The idea that everything is logical and rational is silly to me. So I wrote a post recently called "Attending the Way," and it's the story of me going to New Zealand to visit a design firm, and this design firm owned by a painter and a sculptor who met in art school and decided to open a design firm, and they don't have their names not on the door. Their website is a single page with one line of type that says, "This page intentionally left blank." It's been the same for 20 years. They just do good work. And they do no promotion. They trust that good clients will find them. And they end up doing it. They, like, good clients do find them. They've had very successful careers. They do amazing work. They've had, and I don't even like talking about them too much in terms of the details, because a big part of the allure of this firm to me is the mystery. Who are these people? What are they doing? How do they do it? How have they done this? So I'm not going to explain to you how they've done it. I don't actually know how they've done it. So I wrote this. I was really moved and still am quite moved by this experience. I've known about them for 12 years. It took me 12 years to get there. And when I got there, it was everything I thought it would be and a lot more.
It's amazing.
And I keep writing about this, or I wrote this post about it, and I keep saying, like, I so deeply admire how they have done this, but I keep saying in the post, this is horrible business advice.
Yeah.
Horrible business advice. So a more logical person would show up in this firm and go, okay, you guys got lucky. I mean, clearly you're very good, but this is not something that can be replicated. So therefore, I'm going to throw it out as the anomaly and not learn anything from it. I've learned a ton from it. I also think that, if I were that principled in my business and was from day one, I wouldn't be successful. Part of me doesn't care. There's just something beautiful and it's illogical, but it's beautiful about people being so principled about just doing great work. So is that a decision? I don't know that I've decided anything. Maybe it's steeled some resolve in me on some issues, on, what principles are above what other principles in my principle stack. I don't know.
Can you see a little bit of yourself in them?
A little bit. I wish I saw more of myself in them.
How do you mean?
I wish I could just rip down my whole website and put up a page that says, does if you want our help, find us. As the years go by and the demands, the marketing demands, so the channels, like all the different marketing channels, they just kind of fragment, and there's so many of them now, right? So if you own a small business and you're trying to figure out how do you do marketing in that business, well, thought leadership's just one of them.
Yeah.
Right. So some businesses can succeed on thought leadership, but some have paid ads and but marketing gets busier and busier and busier and busier. And part of me thinks there's got to be a better way. If I just focus on the work and quit marketing at all, not surely, but I love the romantic idea that the business can survive and even thrive. But I don't think I'm willing to test it.
I think you could, especially when you also have people talking about you, because that
Yes.
could almost, like, that hype could be even bigger. Who's Blair? He's somewhere in the mountains in Canada. You don't know where he is. Like, I think that could really be a hype around it. And I mean, you're on social media, but you're not that.
I'm slipping away from social media. I don't know if you've noticed. I'm slipping.
Yeah.
But I do see this as, like, I can talk about the work. I can, like, promote the work, or I can just do the work. And fortunately for me, doing the work is writing about it, because I have to write to think. That's where ideas come from. So I'm writing, I might as well put them out in the world and test them. So there's a certain amount of content creation, and others can decide if it's thought leadership or not, but there's a certain amount of content creation that is required for a knowledge-based business like mine to succeed. But then there's the rest of it of, like, posting when I don't want to post and all that stuff, where it's like, I think I'm almost done with that. And that too is bad business advice. That is not what I should be doing. But I don't care. I've just...
No, and also let us think about that, because I'm also thinking that you're actually developing your business in an interesting way, where Shannon had more that maybe side of the business, and you can allow yourself to take a step back and be a little bit more secret around you, and not be so official, and be there in a house somewhere writing and thinking. And that will be even more interesting. Who is this Blair Enns? I mean, haven't you almost designed your business for you to be able to do this?
I think if I could go back, maybe, but if I could back up 10 years or so I've been doing this about 22 years. If I could go back 10 years ago, I would have taken that path then, hindsight being 2020. And I would have kind of disappeared and tried to build that mystique that you just talked about.
Yeah.
I think it's too late at this point in my career. There's too much of me out there. I wish I could take a bunch of it back.
You can. Just hire someone who watch the internet from a lot of things that you've been doing. And I can be one of the people. I can be one of the people who kind of start the hype around you, and I can help you out with that. You just hide. That could be fun. We'll see. Think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to push you about the emotion things, but a lot of the things you said, Blair, it doesn't feel like logical, rational decisions. It actually feel like you make a lot of decisions from what feels right. Am I wrong?
No, I think you're right. And I think, no decision is entirely rational or entirely, like, heartfelt. So it's who knows how and why we make these decisions.
Okay, I want to go into a little bit like fast thing here, because we've been deep in some things. I do this KPI program. I don't know if you know about Daniel Priestley and Dent. They call it key person of influence, which is kind of also maybe some kind of model.
Oh, KPI. I'm thinking of key performance indicator. Okay.
Yeah, but this is like instead of KPI, measure, it's a key person of influence. So it's the same thing, but they have 5 steps. So you score yourself on those steps, and then you develop. So it's like a yearly program that I'm in right now. And some of the things I have really low score and some things a little bit higher. So I'm curious about like taking you through it really kind of fast, but see your score on it as a thought leader and where I think I am. Okay, so the first is actually pitching, and that's not the pitching you talk about in Win Without Pitching. I think what they mean with pitching is more of how good are you actually in articulating the value of what you're doing. So more of how do you specialize, maybe niching and a clear value proposition or positioning in the market. I think that's what they mean by this pitching. So if we talk about specializing, which, is one of your things too, how would you score yourself from 1 to 10 in specializing?
Yeah, I would score myself differently at different times, and you happen to be catching me at a time where I can't talk about something, but I would say for the last few years, probably a 6, about to go to a 9.
Interesting. Oh my God, is that connected to your new book?
Somewhat.
Oh, okay. I'm not going to go deeper, but it's interesting. Maybe I get to hear about it someday.
Yeah, but I think there are times, and I said the last few years a 6, maybe the last 2 or 3 years. But if you went back previous to that, I would say there are times when more like an 8 or a 9. So I think for a lot of years, I felt like we were really nicely niched and positioned. But it changes. We mess with things, and then the market changes, and there's some evolution that requires when the market changes. So yeah, I think if I look back over 20 years, there's some time I could have given myself a score anywhere from 4 to 10 over the last 20 years. And I think today it's probably at about a 6, and we're going to change that.
Okay, interesting. And if you know that I teach brand strategy for creatives, mostly designers, and you know that I want to develop my thought leadership, would you say that I need to specialize more?
Articulate your specialism for me, please.
Okay, so I teach designers how to go from makers to strategists and getting paid for their thinking before they start designing and make something. So that whole transformation of maker to thinker is what I do.
I like that. That's pretty tight. Do you need to change that? No, I don't think so. I mean, who knows? The goal of specializing is not to get as narrow as possible. It's to be as broad as practical. So that's still pretty broad, but it's a big market. It's a massive market. It's quite a specific value proposition within that market. And then I wouldn't necessarily look at specializing further. I think what narrows you down even more or makes your value proposition more compelling is a model.
Yeah.
And you're working on that. And I think that's probably the appropriate next step.
Good. Thank you. Okay, so the next step is your favorite and where I really need to work on. It's publishing. So they have 5 Ps here. So publishing, credibility through writing, like books, blogs, white papers, articles. How would you score yourself, 1 to 10?
So I think of the ladder of lead generation, one of my models, where you take everything that you can, every lead generation activity or tactic, and you put it on these, on this ladder, various rungs. There's 3 rungs basically. There's the outreach rung at the bottom. It's been a while since I thought about it, but it's in both my books and it's in my next book too. So on the sales-based rung, high immediacy, low authority. So high immediacy, you can send an email today. You can call somebody today. Low authority, I've got 5 or 6 emails in my inbox this morning from people just spamming me, right? The top rung is basically the content or thought leadership rung, where it's low immediacy, high authority. And at the very top of that list, of the ladder of lead generation, the number one thing that you can do is to publish a best-selling book or do a TED talk, not a TEDx talk, an actual TED talk, but publish a best-selling book at the top. So I've done that. And I'm really good at the stuff at the top. And as you move down the rungs, the one in the middle is the marketing rung. I guess that's not really publishing. But if you stay at what we would call the publishing rung, so I've done the big ones, and the other ones underneath that, not so good. So what's my score? I'll give myself an 8 because of the success of the books. Mm-hmm. Probably a 7. And then not so good on the various other aspects of publishing.
Okay, how would you score your friend David C. Baker?
Higher than me. He's written more books. I think, my best-selling book has outsold his best-selling book, but he's written more. But he's a very good writer of books, and he's a very good disciplined writer. He publishes every week. So I would give him an 8, 8.5, maybe 9. Let's give David a 9.
Let's give David a 9. Okay, I give myself a 1. No. I'm not so published, so maybe, yeah. Okay, so then the next one is product. So this is more of a product to market, like what kind of, in order to still be a key person of influence or like a thought leader, you need to have some kind of product that is actually attractive and a good market fit. So how would you see your product? How would you score that into your thought leadership?
2.5 or 3, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's the area where I've done the most experimenting, too much experimenting, none of it scientific enough. And, this business has been very good to me. I have a good life. I have no business complaining, but it really should be multiples of the size that it is. And it is that product market fit that is the thinking. Is it packaged up in the right way for the right people? And I think we've struggled with that repeatedly over the years.
Okay. So that's a little bit lower. We have some potential there. And then we have profile, and that is a little bit how, like, it's actually social media. So if publishing is more the books and articles and a little bit, thought leadership things, profile is more how well known and how active you are on different social media channels.
Yeah, I don't know how to score myself. I'm not good at it, and I'm becoming almost completely uninterested in it. So I wouldn't even know. In some ways, I think this is where the irrational part of me, the romantic part of me, says 0 is the perfect number.
Mm-hmm. Maybe 0 is better than to be like vanilla in the middle. Like either you have to go like on a 8, 9, 10, or 0. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what's the best number, 0 or 10. I'd probably take either of those, and I'm probably a 3 or 4 in there, maybe even lower.
Yeah, because we're talking about you now and not like maybe, posting from Win Without Pitching Manifesto. Yeah. It's from you. Yeah. So the last is partnership, like joint ventures, partnership with different people or different organizations, other authors.
Yeah, that's a great category to be scoring an influencer on. And I do not think of myself as an influencer, so just to be clear. But that's a great, even just, it's in the business model canvas. It's something all business owners should be thinking about, partnerships. And again, probably a 3. Anneli, I think I'm failing at business based on this assessment.
Do you want to join me in the KPI program? Oh my God. Okay. You're not failing. I know you're doing a lot of good things. I think you have kind of almost like an unofficial partnership having Chris Doe as your marketing department, because basically that guy...
Chris has been very good.
That guy is selling books
sales,
for you.
Yeah. He is the number one cited source. He passed David C. Baker a few years ago, but where did you hear from us? Chris Doe. So book sales for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know that almost every video that is with Chris on YouTube that reached so many, like 2.6 million followers already, almost in every video, he refers to you. I heard it late. Yeah. I think I heard it like last video when he talked about from a public speaking thing he did. And he said the thing about selling is change management, says Blair Enns. So he always refers to you. So I think you know it.
I hear notes from people, hey, I'm in an audience watching Chris Do and he just mentioned you. I get that a lot. So I owe Chris a call. I'm actually going to...
But in a way, that's actually a partnership, maybe
totally
unofficial, but I think it's important.
I agree, yeah. Okay, so 4. Thanks, Chris. You've moved me from a 3 to a 4.
Thank you, Chris Do. And as my influence grow and you get more and more, you hide and hide in your house and not being on social media and everything, and I will start creating the hype for you.
There we go. Now that's the partnership I'm looking for, Anneli. You just spread rumors about me and I will disappear.
I'm happy to do that.
I'll publish a book every 3 years.
Yeah.
Perfect.
How amazing would that be? You know what? I have so many notes here that I took because I really want to thank you, because I do, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate your writing so much, because every time, and I go back to that book over and over again, Win Without Pitching Manifesto, I recommend it to everyone. And it's just a joy to see how can a person write so few words that are so meaningful. Like that's what I'm aiming for, like to write something that when my verbal processing can actually boil down to something really meaningful that could guide and help people the way you've been doing with that book. I think it's amazing. So thank you so much for doing that. And also, I love that emotional side of you, because I think it's beautiful to see both. The little Peter Pan, he comes out and it's just, it's that childish kind of, in a way, like joyful boy in you, which I also appreciate so much. That's why I love Two Bobs, your podcast, because both you and David C. Baker have this like really authority about you. As two thought leaders, like two alpha men.
We're two stupid kids.
But then you're like two kids,
together.
like joyfully laugh and make fun, and it's so much fun. So I really appreciate that. I also want to say, is everything around your book secret, or is there anything you want to say about anything marketing yourself before we end this podcast? You have the chance.
Why don't I come back in a few months when I'm ready to talk about it all?
Yeah. I would love to hear more about that book. And in the meantime, I would write my model so I can write my book.
Excellent. Yeah, good for you. You're on to something.
Yes, and I think I will set 4 hours every day where I just leave my phone somewhere else and I'm just going to disciplined sit down and actually write.
The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield.
That's my goal.
Yeah. And it's 4 hours might be a lot. Just don't focus on the length of time.
Okay.
Just start the time you're going to start, and have a minimum be something like 15 minutes or 30 minutes. Like just have a minimum threshold. 4 hours is a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just think it's this discipline and the structure, because now I'm like a crazy person with notes everywhere on my phone, my entire house. My husband is like, what is this? Why are you writing on everything? Envelopes everywhere. I'm like, I just had this thought. I just had to write it down. It's like, okay, we need to be a little bit more structured here.
I wish you the best of luck on your journey, Anneli.
And let's have a call when you know a little bit, when you can talk about the book. And I also will bring from this conversation that maybe thought leadership could also be, a person could be even more interesting if you're not so visible. And maybe personal branding, that we focus a lot of the wrong things, because I think people show up maybe too much and say things that are not even interesting. Maybe they would be even more interesting if they didn't say so much.
Yeah. There's something there.
It's something there. So
the negative space of thought leadership.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, there's a post.
Thanks, Anneli. Great to see you.
I'm going to go to my boot camp now and tell people that I just met one of their big idols, because they love you too. So
thank you. Thank you for spreading the word. You too. Bye-bye.